First of all, I always want to ask about preparedness. Are we prepared after we had that awful incident with the aircraft carrier, the Roosevelt? Are we prepared, both the United States and also our allies in NATO?
Well, it's a complicated question, David. Nice to be back on the show. We have learned that ships are germ factories, and our Navy travels on ships, surprise. But the other parts of our military, the Army and the Marines, not the ones in the Navy, and the Air Force, don't. So I heard our Defense Secretary Esper say recently that we are prepared, that readiness is a huge focus. And I think that we will have to adjust to a world where pandemics make all of us vulnerable in ways we hadn't planned.
So let's talk about some of the things that are on your list for what we need to be prepared for. Maybe start with Afghanistan and what's going on in Afghanistan, because we tend to be so consumed with the coronavirus for good and sufficient reason, we forget about those things like Afghanistan.
Right. We can't forget about Afghanistan. I wrote an op-ed recently that says the bad guys are not waiting on coronavirus to launch attacks. And in Afghanistan, just about a month ago or so, the administration announced a peace deal with the Taliban, negotiated with them, but not the government of Afghanistan. They were left out. But the peace deal is that the Afghan government will let some of their prisoners go, and they will negotiate in good faith with the government. Problem: the government has two different elected leaders at the moment, both claiming victory. So the government is really not functioning. Same kind of thing is going on in Israel. And so I worry that there could be a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. I worry more, by the way, that the missile tests in North Korea and the fact that the Iranians are doing provocative actions against our vessels transiting the Persian Gulf could lead to some miscalculation.
Well, what about that? Talk about Iran, which is, I guess, between Afghanistan and Israel. On the other hand, they basically have gunboats, as I understand, buzzing U.S. naval vessels in the Gulf.
Yeah, that's exactly what they have. And it's not new behavior, but it just happened this week. 11 Iranian naval vessels buzzed 5 of our ships. This is according to U.S. Central Command. I don't think there has been a response. I don't think anyone was hurt. But let's remember that there also were attacks on 2 U.S. bases in Afghanistan following the drone killing of Soleimani, the head of Iranian intelligence. So it's not clear to me what our strategy is there. And I worry, again, about a miscalculation, something that would set off others in the Gulf. Iran is fighting the coronavirus just like we are. They've had a major incident. They have 73,000 cases and 4.5 thousand deaths. That's a higher number than some of the other countries you were just quoting, and yet they're doing this too. It's very worrisome, and I'm not clear what our strategy is.
I also wonder, Jane, is there a potential that this will change the world's relations, not just U.S. relations with China? Because I saw a report today that apparently the British government is reconsidering its position on Huawei now. And there are various people in Europe, forget the United States, in Europe, who are saying, I'm not sure that we can trust China. Is it possible that China's relations with the world might be shifted because of this?
I think that's possible. I think that the fact that this virus originated in China and that it was underreported, that's certainly a credible claim, is hurting China. China's economy is contracting. What the British did is not completely abandon Huawei, but they now have a contract with Ericsson, and so that's very interesting. But I'm hopeful that in the end, I think the only way to deal with a pandemic, which is a worldwide epidemic, is to work together as a world. And we are buying Chinese equipment. Some of it's not working. That's another issue. In Britain, they invested in some faulty equipment to protect against the virus. But what I'm saying is, rather than say, oh, great, China's failing, and then not have a strategy for the world going forward, I'd love to say this is an opportunity to see whether we can have a more clear-eyed and appropriate relationship with China.
And the United States certainly has adversaries, but beyond that, I wonder if one of the biggest threats sometimes to our national security is just simple civil unrest around the world. We have not yet seen, I'm afraid, the full extent of this pandemic in some of the poorer countries around the world and what it could do to their populations. How big a risk is that for our own U.S. national security?
I think it's a huge risk. The population of Africa is the fastest growing population. The number of people in Africa will double by 2050. And we were very helpful in Africa against the Ebola virus. And now it seems to me we're not doing so much. I mean, there is a possibility that through efforts both of the George W. Bush administration, supported strongly by Nancy Pelosi, this program we set up to help Africa could be used against coronavirus. But if it's not, what goodwill we generated will turn, and in addition to the humanitarian tragedy that could happen. So we need a worldwide strategy. Building bigger walls to keep people out is not going to fix the threat of a pandemic. And we're not going to stop travel forever between us and the rest of the world, and we're not going to stop all trade either. And so I, again, hope that we use this crisis as an opportunity, to quote former Mayor Rahm Emanuel, as an opportunity to figure out what needs fixing, starting with at-home infrastructure, et cetera, but also start figuring out what needs fixing in the U.S. Connection to parts of the world that should be our friends.